So this far we have had the State of the Nation address that has attempted to deal with some of the matters relating to a junk rated or a non-investment grade credit rating. We need to see the details, whether it's going to come through or not. So what needs to happen from the finance minister is the ceiling that was introduced in Nene's time, Nene's tenure, needs to be adhered to. In it, he needs to also curtail expenditure growth, especially with these guarantees that are granted to state-owned enterprises, 470 billion rand that has been used as guarantees, which needs to be controlled. He had said there will be partial reconsideration on some state-owned enterprises. Investors will like to see what happens on that front. It was once said by Minister Nene about a year ago. It was repeated now in the State of the Nation's address. One wonders if it will come through. So we want to see some action on the state-owned enterprises. I think is a big thing. That wage bill, in real terms, because inflation is so high, it continues to be a major contributor to the expenditure from the government side. One needs to see how they're going to consolidate expenditure from that end. It's an important outcome that needs to happen. Debt, now sitting at 49% of GDP, needs to be consolidated. We can't continue to borrow, and markets will like to see that it's not going up to 51, 52% because of just expenditure that's been put down. On the other hand, the structural reforms that are required.
Well, the first implication is what it's going to mean for tax revenue collections in the current year. And certainly what we're predicting is that those collections are going to fall short of the mini-budget predictions that were in from October last year by anywhere between 12 billion rand and 22 billion rand to the upside. So that's the first implication. The second implication then is, well, what does that mean for next year? In the absence of any tax increases, what we expect that means is that revenues are going to fall short again of what was predicted in the mini-budget by anywhere between 10 billion rand and 20 billion rand for the 2016-17 fiscal year.
I don't think we'll see any significant relaxations. I mean, for most South Africans, including corporates, foreign investment is possible and is not problematic. So the exchange control regime has been relaxed and is really more a reporting regime than anything else these days. So I don't expect to see anything significant. You know, the global meltdown actually lent a lot of credence to the regime because a lot of people argued that our banks were saved somewhat through having to comply with exchange controls. So we don't expect anything significant on the exchange control front this year.
The most impacted sector of business are the small and medium enterprises. The blue chips obviously require different support. I do think that lower taxes from that end will be very useful in that sector. But the smaller businesses are finding it very difficult in terms of just red tape. Those that interact, in the public sector are finding it difficult in terms of payments that are coming from the government. So what needs to happen is we need to support the small and medium enterprises. The approach that we've taken in South Africa on this front, I don't think is sufficient. It's not good enough to have a ministry that looks at small and medium enterprises. If you look at countries like Mauritius, for that sector of the business, they have lowered corporate tax substantially. In fact, they've given tax breaks to the next 10 years at a certain threshold of companies making profits. They've removed this whole red tape of application to one ministry to another in order to actually be a functional business. They call it a one-stop shop model of small and medium enterprise support, that which we can learn from. I don't think it's sufficient. The approach that's been taken in South Africa on small and medium enterprises is insufficient.
Well, the first question is, when someone says a wealth tax, what do they mean? There's the technical term and then there's the broad term that everyone uses in a general sense and so on. So some would equate a wealth tax with being let's say, a 45% tax rate, personal income tax rate for wealthy individuals, while some others would look at it from a more technical perspective and say, well, it depends on what base that tax is levied, whether or not it constitutes a wealth tax. So we must understand that from a technical perspective, we already have wealth taxes in this country, a number of them, including, for example, the state duty and even your local government property rates or wealth taxes because of the base on which they're levied. But insofar as any reforms in that space are concerned, we don't expect there to be any changes this year. It must also be borne in mind that wherever you look, anywhere in the world where wealth taxes, and particularly recurring annual wealth taxes, have been introduced, that they have tended to collect very small amounts of revenue. So we don't expect to see anything this year, and certainly the Davis Tax Committee has got further work to do in that regard and has been mandated to do further work in that regard.
Well, as we mentioned, is that we're not expecting any announcements to be made with regards to the Davis Tax Committee, because I think government is trying to take a very prudent approach, especially with the mining changes that were proposed by the committee, the carbon tax, where the Davis tax said take 1 year, give a 0% tax rate, and then National Treasury went and wanted to effect it. So what we are expecting them to kind of give us guidance onto the second reports, which they will be taking out, and that will then tell us how exactly that will trickle into the tax legislation.